John loved his Camaro. It was his most prized possession. He would wash and polish it every weekend to keep it looking its best. One Saturday morning, he decided to wash the car while his daughter, Lily, played nearby. "Sometimes I still hear that scream of my little girl at night," John says, looking back at this horrible event. Little did she know she saved herself from becoming an orphan. It seemed like everything was going in slow motion at that moment. Lily was frozen to the ground, and it was surprising she was even able to talk, let alone scream at her father. Her father heard his daughter's concerned words, but it was already too late. Lily looked on in horror with tears in her eyes. She was not able to prevent the inevitable, but it was not too late for her to help. She knew she could not do it alone, but who was going to believe her? She barely believed what she had just witnessed happen to her father. What Lily did not realize at the time was that the whole ordeal had been filmed by her home's security camera, which was a very good thing, otherwise nobody would have believed it. But what happened to John? And how was his daughter Lily going to help him? But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe and ring the notifications bell so you never miss our upcoming stories. On the fateful Saturday morning, John decided to take his Camaro for a spin and wash it later that day. He was in a particularly good mood that day, as he had just received some good news about his job. But that good mood would not last for long, as something terrible was set to happen that day. Lily ran after him and begged if she could come along. John usually said no because she was still too small to sit up front, but Lily insisted she had grown and even had her booster seat ready in her hands. John couldn't say no to his daughter in the mood he was in, so he put her inside. Lily loved every second of their drive together and was sad they were returning home. John told his daughter she could play in the front yard as he washed his car, and she happily agreed. But neither of them would have ever expected their day to take the turn that it did. When they arrived home, Lily immediately ran to her scooters and hopped on one. She rode her scooter up and down the street while she laughed with happiness. John smiled at his little girl as he filled his bucket with water and grabbed his soap and sponge. John kept a close eye on Lily while she rode her scooter through the street. He listened to her laugh in the background as he washed his car. But after a while, his attention drifted, and Lily's laugh slowly faded away. It almost seemed like he had forgotten about his daughter. John was almost done washing his Camaro. He hadn't turned around to look at his daughter in quite some time as he was fully focused on his car. That's when Lily screamed. John turned around in a panic, wondering what could have happened. He saw his daughter pointing at something on the ground, her face twisted in fear. John's heart raced as his daughter urgently tried to warn him about something. Unable to see through the soapy water on the ground, he struggled to understand what she was pointing at. Lily kept yelling at her father to watch out. She closed her eyes, afraid to see what she thought was bound to happen. John, who could hear the horror in his daughter's voice, so he knew to take her seriously. It was total chaos, and no one was around to help them. John frantically jumped up and down as he tried to spot what Lily was pointing at. His foot slipped on the soapy water as he jumped up and down. Lily watched in horror as her father fell backward, hitting his head on the pavement. She screamed and yelled at her father to get up because the danger was still close to him. But as John lay there, dazed and bleeding, he heard Lily's screams grow fainter and fainter. Lily cried with anxiety while watching her father struggle to stay conscious. She quickly ran to him while keeping a close eye on the danger. Lily yelled for help, hoping one of their neighbors would hear her, but it stayed quiet. All Lily could think about was saving her father. She didn't care about the dangerous situation anymore. She pulled a final time and was able to move her father onto the grass. Lily was lucky her father lay in the soapy water, as that was probably why she could pull him to safety. But the danger wasn't over yet. Her father's head was bleeding heavily, and it looked very scary. Lily quickly got up and ran inside, searching for a phone. Luckily for Lily, her father's phone rang just as she ran inside. It was her mother calling. She quickly picked up the phone and instantly began yelling at her mother to come home. Lily's mother was taken aback by her daughter's frantic screams, but she didn't waste a second and immediately drove home. There she walked into a horrific scene. As soon as she saw her husband lying on the ground, next to a little puddle of blood and soapy water, she knew she had to call 911. As they waited for the ambulance to arrive, Isabella asked her daughter what had happened. But Lily was too upset to talk about it. Instead, she sat beside her father and held his hand as he kept falling in and out of consciousness. Meanwhile, Lily's mother ran in and out of the house, grabbing wipes and bandages for John's wound. This was something Lily never in a million years thought was going to happen today. The day started so well, and had turned into her worst nightmare. She closed her eyes and quietly cried as she listened to the sirens coming closer and closer. When the ambulance arrived, Lily's father had lost all consciousness. They quickly got a sense of what had happened and put him on a stretcher. Lily and her mother drove behind the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Lily's mother tried her best to hide her worries, but Lily could feel the tension in the air. Lily and her mother arrived at the hospital. They asked what room John was brought to, and was horrified to hear he was taken to the operation room. They had to perform an emergency operation because of the huge wound on his head. Lily and her mother felt helpless. All they could do was wait. Lily was still completely shaken by what she had seen. Her mother was trying to get her to explain herself and explain what had happened to her husband. But every time Lily even thought about it a little bit, the poor girl could only cry. All her mother could hope for was that John would make it out of surgery and be able to explain for himself what had happened that afternoon. One thing she knew for sure, at least: if he were to make it out of this alive, he was never going near the Camaro again. Hours passed by and John was still in the operating room. Everyone was worried sick, and there had been no updates on his health so far. Once every few minutes, Lily's mother would get up and pace around the room. Not knowing what was going on behind those doors was very nerve-wracking. After what seemed like an eternity, a doctor arrived, but he didn't seem to have good news. His look was downcast and he had an eerie energy around him. The doctor informed Lily's mother that the operation was taking longer due to complications and a critical decision needed to be made. Since her husband was unconscious, they required her permission. Shocked, she asked what they needed her consent for. Tension filled the room. The doctor explained they had few options left, and John's life was at stake. There was one thing left they could try, but it would be an experimental operation. There would be no certainty that John would survive. Lily cried as she yelled at her mother to give permission. She would try anything to save her father, but it wasn't that easy. Lily's mother had to take a lot of things into consideration. She loved her husband and wouldn't want anything more than to save his life. Why couldn't they save him with the standard procedures? What had happened to him to leave him in such a condition? Lily's mother, filled with worry, urged her to tell the doctors what had happened to her father, believing it might help save him. Though understanding it was difficult, she pleaded with Lily to try for his sake. Lily felt overwhelmed and emotional, struggling with the weight of her mother's request. Lily wanted to help her father, she really did. But talking about that horrible moment wasn't something she could do yet. It was just too scary. So, she told the doctor she wanted to try and tell him, but in a private room. The doctor understood her situation and guided Lily into an empty room. They stayed in that room for several minutes, leaving Lily's mother outside in the waiting room. All she could do now was hope her daughter would find the strength to tell the doctor everything and potentially save her father from dying. After 10 to 15 minutes, the door opened, and the doctor rushed out. He didn't look or speak to Lily's mother at all. Instead, he ran straight past her and into the operating room. Lily's mother asked her what had happened, and Lily, seeking reassurance, admitted she had already told him and asked if her mother was proud of her. Lily's mother was very proud, but she still had no clue about what happened herself. And she didn't want to put her daughter through that pain a third time. So she decided to wait for the doctor to return. He had to inform her about what happened sooner or later. She wasn't going to leave the hospital without answers. The waiting game had begun again, and Lily sought little things to do to kill time. She had already walked through the room a million times, and she wanted to see her father. So, she snuck quietly to the operating room and tried to open the door. But sadly, it was locked. As Lily attempted to open the door again, a doctor burst out, pushing past her with excitement. He announced that John was now in stable condition, still unconscious, but the operation had been completed successfully. Lily and her mother felt immense relief, though they knew it wasn't over. They were told they could see John soon and were directed to wait in room 11 while he recovered from anesthesia. Lily was overjoyed at the thought of seeing her father again. When John was finally brought into the room, he looked drastically different, covered in bandages and connected to machines. However, the most alarming moment came when he failed to recognize his wife and daughter, leaving them stunned and worried. The doctor, equally puzzled, asked them to follow him outside for an explanation. Outside of the room, the doctor told Lily and her mother this reaction wasn't unusual, and that it probably happened while operating on his head injury. Or it could also be because of his concussion, he wasn't sure. But when asked if John's memory would ever return, he couldn't answer. Lily was devastated. Her own father didn't recognize her anymore. He had no idea who she was, who her mother was, what had happened to him, where he lived, nothing. And it would be a long journey for him to regain his memory. They worked long and hard to get John to trust them again. They brought photo albums to the hospital and told him about things they used to do together. Lily showed him her favorite stuffed animals and got the books he used to read to her. And slowly but surely, John started to change. It took him about a month to remember everything again. And the doctor said that was a very short amount of time. But Lily and her mother made it happen with their love and dedication. And after a month and a half in the hospital, John was finally ready to go home again. But there was still one question that stayed unanswered. Well, Lily knew the answer, and the doctors did as well. But by being so caught up in her husband losing his memory and her trying to undo it, Lily's mother still had no idea about what happened that dreadful day. So, on John's last day at the hospital, while he was getting ready and packing everything up, Lily's mother walked over to the doctor and finally asked what her daughter had told him 1.5 months ago. The doctor had to think for a second, but quickly remembered Lily's almost unbelievable story. Lily's told the doctor she had been playing with her scooter while her father washed the car. But as she turned to face her father, she noticed something moving on the ground. At first, she didn't think much of it, as she couldn't really see what it was because of all the soapy water. What she thought was the garden hose moving around in the water was actually a very poisonous snake. The snake bit John in the ankle, and the venom spread through his bloodstream. But because the doctors had no idea he had been bitten, they had no idea why his organs were starting to fail during the operation. It wasn't until after Lily told them about the snake that they knew they had to do a blood transfusion to save his life, and they were just in time. Because if the venom had spread through his body any longer, there would have been a funeral instead of a celebration. They didn't want to stay in the place where John almost died or anywhere near poisonous snakes. So, as soon as John had fully recovered, he and his family decided to move away. They moved to a quiet street in another state, where no poisonous snakes would ever come. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and ring the notifications bell so you never miss amazing tales like this one.